Hey guys, tonight we sink into the heavy folds of time gaslight flickering outside your fogged window pane. A damp wool coat slung over a too-high back chair, a scratchy blanket pulled up over your chest as you try to settle your buzzing brain. You're not alone. The year is 1874. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and musty drapes. And even the doctors are whispering, is overthinking a disease now? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly down a narrow cobblestone street, boots echoing under a thick haze of coal fog, trying not to breathe too deeply. Around you, London shuffles and sighs in a restless half-sleep. It's not just you have. The city is up at this hour, tossing beneath horsehair mattresses or pacing hallways with candle stubs. You think it might be the tea, or maybe the telegrams? Or, if you asked a Victorian physician, he'd tell you it's your nervous system revolting against industrial strain. Doctors are beginning to gather at medical halls and upper-crust clubs. Worried no, convinced that civilization is thinking itself to death. The term cerebral exhaustion gets tossed around a lot, often by men with impressive mutton chops and very few actual patients. Still, it sounds serious enough and relatable. Too much brain activity, they say, leads to sleeplessness, melancholy, distraction, and a general lack of moral fiber. You squint at your own shadow. That's a lot for a Tuesday. Your mind drifts to Dr. George Beard, a prominent figure in the American camp, who's loudly popularizing neurasthenia, a fashionable diagnosis for well-being worn out by modern life. Fast trains, noisy newspapers, loud clocks, thinking too hard in gaslit libraries. It's all too much for the delicate human frame. In Beard's world, your thoughts aren't just thoughts, they're dangerous expenditures of a finite psychic energy. And once it's spent, you collapse like an overwound pocket watch. Historians still argue whether Beard actually believed this or simply saw a branding opportunity he did. After all, refer to it as American nervousness, as if Europe was less full of twitchy minds. But his theory caught on, crossing the Atlantic like a particularly anxious steamship. Soon, British doctors were warning patients against too many ideas after dinner. You duck beneath an archway, where a brass plaque reads Sleep and Nervous Disorders, Dr. W.C. Healy. Inside the air smells of camphor, beeswax polish, and worry. There are waiting room patients flipping through tattered almanacs, their eyes bleary from long nights. A woman in feathers fans herself aggressively. A man scribbles notes, then crosses them out, then writes them again. Overthinking was not merely a complaint, here it was a documented diagnosable syndrome. Some of the earliest sleep specialists of the Victorian age weren't sleep doctors, as we know them. Now, they were more like protopsychiatrists, physicians orbiting around neurology and psychology, but mostly groping in the dark. Sometimes literally. Sleep labs didn't exist yet, but dim gaslight and cool rooms were advised in case your nerves were too easily excited. You follow a nurse with a wax mustache and very little urgency to a treatment room. You re-handed a clipboard and ask gently if you've been experiencing disturbances of the higher faculties, which is a polite Victorian way of asking, have you been thinking too much before bed? Outside the window, a lamplighter is extinguishing the last of the street flames. Inside, the doctor suggests an evening routine. Walk for 30 minutes. Eat a light dinner. And absolutely no novel reading after 9 p.m. Excitement of the imagination, he warns, is the enemy of repose. You try to imagine being soothed by oatmeal and silence, but the nerves still itch beneath your skin. The doctor nods knowingly and produces a small vial from his desk. Bromide salts, he says. Just a touch in warm milk will sedate the cephalic current. You're pretty sure that's not a real phrase, but you nod. It's late. The room gets quieter. The edges of the furniture begin to blur. You wonder how many other people just like you are lying in stiff beds across the city, prescribed stillness for their spiraling thoughts. A strange comfort, perhaps, or maybe just loneliness with a doctor's note. Victorians, bless them, took sleep very seriously, especially when it went wrong. Rest was not just physical recovery, it was moral, spiritual, and social recovery. A person who didn't sleep well was suspect. It might be unstable, or revolutionary, or French. As you lie back, the doctor advises you to resist any urge to write or ruminate. The mind, he says gently, must learn to idle. He doesn't mean relaxation exactly, he means a kind of waking coma. Thinking was considered dangerous after dusk, especially for the middle class, who had the leisure time to spiral. A fringe theory you overhear while dozing. One eccentric in Edinburgh believed that poor sleep was caused by an invisible fog of magnetic anxiety drifting over cities at night, disturbing the mental ether. He advised tinfoil hats and sleeping in bathtubs filled with dried lavender. He was gently removed from several salons. Historians still debate whether Victorians actually slept less than their ancestors, or simply noticed their insomnia more, now that they weren't sleeping in barns or next to snoring goats. Either way, by the 1870s, you were expected to sleep quietly, efficiently, and on time like everything else in the empire. A carriage rolls past, hooves clacking on wet stone, and you realize your mind hasn't slowed down at all. But maybe that is the point of this era as sleep doctors. Not that they cured insomnia, but that they gave it vocabulary, ritual, and something resembling dignity. You sip your lukewarm bromide milk. It tastes like chalk and submission. You sit there perfectly mostly still, on a dusty, embroidered chair that has probably outlived for previous owners and 2 family cats. Across from you, a medical diagram on the wall shows a human figure covered in what can only be described as frantic lightning bolts. It's meant to represent the nervous system. You think it looks more like someone losing a fencing match to an eel? This is the age of nerve theory, a not-so-scientific framework through which the Victorians tried to explain almost everything they didn't understand about health, mood, and especially sleep. That flicker of unease when you lie in bed with your mind buzzing. According to the books, that's your nervous energy being overstimulated by modern life. Trains, telegrams, typewriters, thoughts. You might be wondering, wasn't that just stress? But Victorians needed drama. They didn't call it stress. They called it neurasthenia, a term that roughly translates to nerve weakness, but sounds far more poetic and a lot more medical. Imagine being prescribed a long ocean voyage in 2 months without letters, because your brain was too sparkly. Your doctor this evening is a soft-spoken man with trembling spectacles and a tendency to say more than any actual words. He gestures to a thick volume on his desk. Diseases of Modern Nervous Life. The title alone makes you feel guilty for checking your pocket watch more than twice today. Historians still argue whether neurasthenia was a real neurological condition. It's a convenient label for undiagnosed depression, or simply a fashionable excuse for taking naps in silk pajamas. But for the Victorians, it was everything. A catch-all for what we now call burnout. It's anxiety, insomnia, even existential dread. You shift slightly in your seat as the doctor begins to list symptoms. Headaches, night sweats, shallow breathing. Muscle twitches, melancholy, confusion, a craving for pickles. You blink. He clarifies, female patients only on that last one. Ow. You nod solemnly as if that clears things up. The nervous system in Victorian theory functioned like a telegraph wire. Long, delicate, and easily frayed by too many incoming signals. Thoughts weren't just abstract. They were believed to create measurable wear and tear on the brain's physical tissue. The more you think, the more you corrode. This made philosophers especially suspicious. Also schoolteachers, and of course novel readers. You lean your head back against the wall. The wallpaper has a pattern that looks suspiciously like a nest of startled worms. It's oddly appropriate. In this era, people were genuinely worried that industrialization had created a society where nobody's nerves could keep up. Train schedules didn't match natural rhythms. Newspapers arrived too early. Dinner conversations were too stimulating. One wrong idea at bedtime, and you'd lie awake for hours, clutching a hot water bottle and wondering if Beethoven had insomnia too. According to the fringe crowd, always lurking in the velvet-draped corners. Some doctors believed the overuse of the nervous system could even lead to physical collapse. Your spine might simply refuse to carry your weight. One physician dramatically called it spinal sympathy. Another insisted too much arithmetic could cause facial blindness. But you cover your face instinctively, just in case. And yet, for all its melodrama, there's something oddly comforting about how seriously the Victorians took mental strain. Today, we call it overthinking. Back then, it was a condition worthy of rest cures, milk diets, and handwritten letters from your doctor advising mindful bathing. Sure, their treatments were often hilariously wrong, but the recognition that a chattering mind could derail your entire life, that part feels timeless. You're handed a pamphlet, cream-colored, embossed, and almost unreadably flowery. It outlines a 5-step plan to soothe your overworked nerves. Step 1. Eliminate all stimulating thoughts after 7 p.m. Step 2. Avoid mirrors at night. You ask why? The doctor murmurs something about mental reflection. You nod again, trying to look scholarly while silently swearing to ignore your own reflection forever. Step 3 suggests reclining in a semi-horizontal posture to encourage cerebrospinal calm. You glance at the diagram. It looks a lot like falling asleep in a hammock, or possibly fainting in church. Fringe tip from the margins of the medical world. 1 German. Physician likely very lonely believed that surrounding yourself with plants, trained to open only at night, could calibrate your mind to natural sleep cycles. He was later arrested for trespassing in a botanical garden. You are advised to keep your bedroom very still, very cold, and ideally lavender-scented. No novels, and definitely no piano playing after dusk. Musical overstimulation, one paper warned, may lead to unwanted arousals of the cerebrum. You make a mental note to never say that phrase aloud. You're shown to a cot in the back room, purely for demonstration purposes, the doctor assures you. The mattress is thin, the air is cold. The blanket smells of cloves and starch. A nurse places a small velvet pouch on your chest and whispers, "That's crushed hops." For the nerves, you lie there, willing your mind to go blank. Instead, it does what it always does. It remembers everything you've ever said at every dinner party you've ever attended. The doctor's voice floats in again. "Let your brain cool," he says. Thoughts are just heat in the wires. It sounds ridiculous, but also kind of beautiful. Think about the contrast. How these theories of nerve energy, however unscientific, offered a language for what you're feeling right now. It's that low hum in your chest, the quiet dread before sleep, the mind that will not stop making lists even when the gas light's out. You turn your head and close your eyes, picturing a brain that can spark and sigh, short-circuit and slow. Maybe the Victorians didn't have all the answers. They knew enough to whisper, "Be gentle with your nerves." You stir beneath a blanket that crackles faintly with starch, your toes curled under the edge like it might keep the thoughts in. Your eyes flick toward the flickering lamp, and you wonder if anyone in this house has ever truly slept. The walls are thick with brocade, the silence punctuated by the distant tick of a grandfather clock, and yet your brain is louder than the horses outside. Maybe this is what they meant by the gentleman's curse. Neurasthenia might have been fashionable in the drawing rooms and lecture halls, but within the mahogany-paneled world of upper-class men, it became an almost inevitable diagnosis, like catching ennui in your father's study. If you were a gentleman in the late Victorian era, and you started yawning more than usual, forgetting the ends of sentences or staring too long at the fire, someone would eventually say, brain fatigue. Your lifestyle, reading newspapers, debating moral philosophy, smoking thoughtfully while watching the rain was already suspiciously mental. If you happened to suffer from insomnia, headaches, or a lack of interest in hunting trips, well, the diagnosis practically wrote itself. Cerebral overuse, they'd call it, a sort of elite burnout with mahogany trim. This wasn't the rough exhaustion of miners or the bone-deep fatigue of factory workers. This was refined weariness, the kind that made you sensitive to the wrong shade of wallpaper. Think of it as the predecessor to executive stress leave, only with more laudanum and monocles. Historians still argue whether this diagnosis was a polite way of labeling depression among the wealthy, or if it really was believed to be an actual condition caused by excess thinking. What's certain is this: if you were male, educated, and frowning at the breakfast table too often, someone was going to recommend a complete restand, possibly a change of continent. You slide your hand across the bedside table. There's a slim, leather-bound diary resting there, unused. Writing would help, but the doctor says no. Writing engages. Writing stimulates. Thinking is the problem. You're to lie flat, breathe shallow, and not worry, which, naturally, makes you worry more. In the corner of the room, There's a writing desk that calls to you like a warm loaf of bread. It smells of old ink and decisions you're no longer allowed to make. The nurse has hidden your fountain pen anyway. Too many men have written themselves into exhaustion, she muttered earlier, folding your socks in furious silence. It's odd, though, how gender divided the symptoms of overthinking. Meant neurasthenia was seen as the natural cost of mental labor. For women? Well, we'll get to that next time. But for now, imagine being told you were too intelligent to rest. Too aware. Too driven. The treatments were not designed to re-energize your mind, but to sedate it. One especially charming regimen involved something called mental fasting. No books, no newspapers, no discussions longer than 4 sentences. The theory was that your brain had consumed too many thoughts, and now needed to starve for a bit. Like a Victorian juice cleanse, but for existential dread. You swing your legs to the floor, a whisper of cool wood beneath your heels. In a nearby house, a bell chimes for the night porter. Someone's medicine has arrived. Probably bromides again, or perhaps a draft of chloral hydrate, the 19th century's go-to sleep syrup. You think of it as the sleepy cousin of chloroform. Very effective. Also habit-forming.
But so is caffeine.
You remember reading about one of the most famous sufferers of gentlemanly overthinking, Charles Darwin, who spent decades battling fatigue, panic spells, and strange physical symptoms no doctor could pin down. Some believe he had neurasthenia, others suspect anxiety. A few insist it was the guilt of dismantling creationism, one finch at a time. Whether Darwin, or just an anxious barrister from Blackheath, the treatment often looked the same. Early dinners, warm baths, a firm mattress, and absolute mental silence after dusk. One doctor insisted his patients avoid philosophical speculation before bed. Another banned fiction entirely. A fringe figure in Surrey once invented a strange hat lined with thin lead sheets, claiming it blocked intrusive thoughts. It also blocked friendships, but some patients swore it worked. Others just wore it when their mother-in-law visited. Even activities had to be managed carefully. Chess, no. Dangerous to the frontal lobes. Poetry, risky. Gardening, acceptable if supervised. One record shows a man who was discouraged from pruning roses because the thorns might provoke symbolic ideation. You genuinely can't make this up. And yet, despite all the oddity, you begin to understand something deeper. These men were indeed just tired. They were terrified of their own minds. The 19th century was, for many, a cognitive revolution. Suddenly, there was too much to learn, too much to process, too many choices. Colonialism, capitalism, existentialism, it was like being handed the entire library of human thought and told to fall asleep immediately. So you lie down again, the blanket pulled tight across your chest, not for warmth, but to hold yourself in. The room hums with the silence of enforced rest. In this world, the overthinking man is not a philosopher. He's a patient. His mind, once prized, has turned against him. And the only cure is surrender. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you feel the delicious weight of nothing. Then your brain whispers, "Did I lock the cabinet? Was it wrong to laugh at that toast? Should I have gone into theology?" You sigh. The curse continues. A carriage creaks in the distance as you stare at the ceiling, its wooden beams cross-hatched like the inside of a worn-out violin case. Somewhere, under all the hush and starch, your brain still races. But tonight, you are not a gentleman with overworked nerves. Tonight, you've slipped into the quieter, often more suffocating world of the Victorian woman's sleepless mind. And, trust me, this ride has no brakes. If men were diagnosed with neurasthenia for thinking too much, women were diagnosed with it for, well, existing, especially if they had opinions, read novels, or asked too many questions after dinner. You adjust your imaginary petticoats as you settle into the role your corset. Dose and tea bite quite as much in this narrative, but the expectations, they still suffocate. Victorian doctors believed that a woman's nervous system was directly tied to her reproductive health, because of course they did. Everything came back to the womb. Couldn't sleep? That's your uterus? Sad for no reason? Womb? Read 3 books in a week. Definitely womb. This led to some wildly creative and deeply questionable diagnoses. One of the most notorious, hysteria. The root word, hystera, Greek for uterus. That's right. The condition literally meant you're being irrational because you have a uterus. Modern historians wince. A lot. Now, neurasthenia and hysteria were sometimes treated as cousins, two sides of the same overthinking coin. But while neurasthenia in men was framed as a crisis of intellectual fatigue, in women, it was a failure to conform quietly. It's too sensitive, too restless, too much. God. And heaven forbid you said you had trouble sleeping. That was a red flag. Because a woman who lies awake thinking might one day think out loud. Historians still debate whether the popularity of the hysteria label was a way to suppress early feminist thought or simply the result of medical ignorance. Either way, the treatments leaned heavily toward control rather than comfort. Your doctor, who smells faintly of boiled wool and authority, tells you that your sleeplessness is likely a sign of psychic congestion. You blink. He explains that too many mental impressions have backed up in your brain like a chimney blocked with feminist pamphlets. You need a rest cure. Ah, yes, the rest cure. Invented by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. This delightful regimen involves 6 to 8 weeks of total isolation, forced feeding, electrotherapy, and absolutely no reading, writing, or walking. Patients were confined to bed, not allowed to lift their own heads, massaged daily, fed heavy dairy and meat 5 times a day. It was supposed to calm the nervous system. More often, it just induced depression and weight gain. You're told to lie still, completely still, and not use your eyes for anything except blinking. Your maid removes your journal, your mirror, even your sewing basket. You are left with white walls and a tray of beef tea. And while no one will say it out loud, this is not treatment, it's obedience training. There were women who accepted it, women who endured, and then there were the rebels. You've probably heard of one. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, author of The Yellow Wallpaper. She was prescribed the rest cure and nearly lost her mind. Later, she wrote that haunting short story where a woman confined to a bedroom begins seeing figures moving inside the wallpaper. Some say the story was fiction. Others believe it was a thinly veiled scream for help. Either way, Gilman eventually walked away from the rest curand into literary history. Meanwhile, other fringe practitioners offered gentler alternatives: hydropathy, water-based healing, or talking therapy, which was still considered suspiciously French. One Swiss doctor recommended women sleep beside open windows with a pinnacone under their pillow to reconnect with the trees. You briefly consider trying it. Even the more accepted treatments, though, often blurred the line between care and control. For instance, chloroform, widely used to sedate women with excess emotion, was administered liberally, sometimes without consent. One record describes a woman who was chloroformed every night for 2 weeks until she stopped crying. Another lists a woman who rambled when sleepless and was treated with bloodletting. She later developed anemia. Everyone seems surprised. Still, some Victorian women found their own ways to resist. You smile slightly at the thought of women's sleep salon secret spaces where frustrated wives gathered to discuss insomnia, dreams, and emotional repression over hot milk and poetry. One group in Bath reportedly tried dream journaling in code to outsmart their nosy husbands. Another practiced group silence, lying on divans in a circle, not speaking for hours, just breathing and listening. A fringe group in Brighton even experimented with synchronized sleeping. Women would meet in the same parlor nightly, drink the same chamomile infusion, lie in the same direction, and hope their dreams would find each other. Historians have yet to prove whether they succeeded. But the thought of it, a soft rebellion wrapped in lace, is lovely. And all the while, the professional doctors kept scribbling in their ledgers. Patient exhibits excessive animation when discussing poetry, sits up late with candle. Eyes dart too quickly when spoken to. These weren't symptoms, they were sentences. A woman with thoughts, after all, was halfway to trouble. You breathe in. Lavender and starch. The room feels tighter now, as if the air itself has memorized the rules. But even here, in this carefully monitored, over-sanitized sleep chamber, you feel something tugging loose. Maybe it's that rebellious itch. Maybe it's the understanding that not every thought has to be subdued. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to realize the very act of lying here, thinking all these forbidden things, is its own kind of victory. The mind can be silenced for a time, but it never really stops. Not for gentlemen, not for women, not for you. You pull the blanket up to your chin and smile, ever so slightly, into the dimness. Tonight, you let the thoughts flicker, quietly but freely. The wallpaper presses in, again not yellow this time, but an almost respectable beige, the sort you'd find in a doctor's guest bedroom or a modest coastal inn. You listen to the wind tapping at the glass and wonder, if the mind is too loud and the body too still, what's left to treat? That's where the Victorians began experimenting with something quite physical. Indeed, the sleep machine age had arrived. You stir slightly beneath the covers, imagining yourself in a narrow bed somewhere in a London clinic, soft brass rails gleaming faintly beside you. A nurse tiptoes past with a tray of glass bottles. Somewhere, someone is preparing the machinery, an entire room of gears. Wires and humming boxes, all meant to coax your mind into sleep. You may have overthought, but they over-engineered. The first generation of mechanical sleep aids was rooted in the idea that you could physically override insomnia almost, like tricking the brain by rocking it back to infancy. Weighted cradles for adults, rotating cots, and even mild centrifugal beds were trialed. Yes, you read that right. One enterprising inventor designed a gently spinning sleep platform. Believing centrifugal motion could untangle brain tension, his test subject reported dizziness and vomiting. He called it a promising start. Historians still argue whether these devices were taken seriously by medical professionals, or if they simply filled the lucrative niche of nervous middle-class patients eager for novelty. But records show a small boom in patent filings for neurocalming devices, including motorized beds that jiggled at adjustable frequencies. One London firm even offered a deluxe model that could oscillate vertically and play waltzes. At the gentler end of the spectrum, there was the Pulsicon, a handheld vibrating contraption first used for restoring nervous vitality. It looked like a brass periscope crossed with a meat tenderizer. You'd hold it against your temples or chest while it buzzed softly, promising to realign your inner vibrations. It was also, oddly enough, recommended for hiccups. A few clinics installed what were called neuroharmonic room spaces filled with low-frequency humming generated by special tuning forks and gongs. You'd lie there in silence while the room droned like a massive metallic cat. Patients said it felt like their thoughts were being scrubbed with velvet. One woman swore she entered the room angry and came out convinced she should learn Greek. Then there was galvanic therapy, mild. Electrical currents passed through the skull to pacify cerebral circuits. Essentially, wires were clipped to your temples or wrists while a very serious man turned a crank or adjusted dials. Most patients reported a tingling sensation and vague regret. One newspaper even joked that sleep was achieved but only out of fear. You shift on your imaginary pillow, almost hearing the buzz of the galvanometer, like a mosquito with delusions of grandeur. The truth is, these machines weren't invented because they worked. They were invented because people were desperate to sleep, to stop spiraling, to quiet the background noise of industrial-age life. You think of the strange irony. The very era that birthed the factory, the telegraph and the railway, also gave rise to chronic overstimulation. Cities no longer slept. Streets were loud. Time was measured, scheduled, industrialized. You were never quite finished, never fully rested. No wonder people started looking at machines and thinking, maybe this thing knows something I don't. One rather poetic attempt at mechanical sleep aid came from a German watchmaker, who built an internal clock harmonizer, essentially a metal headband that ticked faintly near your ears, mimicking the rhythm of a pocket watch. He claimed it could resynchronize a restless mind by restoring the body's hidden horology. It sold poorly, but did inspire a short-lived opera. Fringe ideas weren't limited to gadgets, of course. One group in Edinburgh swore by sleep cabinets, closets lined with cork and velvet, where you'd lie curled in total darkness. No windows, no sounds, just a box and your thoughts. Patients described it as calming, claustrophobic, or transformative, depending on their mood. One man claimed to leave his body nightly, inside his cabinet. His wife claimed he was just hiding from her knitting club, always as you traced the edge of your imaginary blanket. There was the tension between natural sleep and artificial silence. Should the mind be soothed into slumber or forced into it? Were dreams a gift or a symptom? Doctors couldn't agree. Some believed dreams were the mind's way of digesting reality. Others thought they were residue from daytime overstimulation, like static left over on a tape reel. A few hardliners declared that true health meant dreamless sleep. And if you woke remembering anything, You were likely overthinking and needed another week of milk and cod liver oil. You recall a quote scribbled in an old journal. "We are no longer soothed by moonlight. We require machinery." It was written by a woman undergoing rotating bed therapy in 1892. She later escaped the clinic and became a lighthouse keeper. It wasn't all bleak, though. In some cases, these machines genuinely comforted people. The predictability of a humming motor, the gentle thrum of coils, the illusion of control in a world that rarely offered it. For some insomniacs, just lying beside a device labeled soporific engine was enough. You could pretend help had arrived. That sleep was only a dial away. And now, as you close your eyes in this dim imaginary room, the memory of those worry devices hums faintly in your ears. No actual wires, no odd contraptions, but maybe the idea alone is enough. It's that someone once cared enough to build a machine just to hush the brain. That even in the age of coal smoke and rigid morals, someone tried to bottle quiet. You smile barely. The machine clicks off. And in the hush it leaves behind, maybe, just maybe, sleep tiptoes in. You roll gently in the memory of that hush, still wired, but less frantic, as if the last section's humming machinery has just wound down. But now, imagine that instead of electric contraptions and churning brass beds, someone simply leans over you with a small glass vial and says, "Take this, it'll make the thoughts stop." Tonight, you've entered the soft-lit, often dangerous world of Victorian sleep tonics and tranquilizers, place of tinctures, powders, elixirs, and, let's be honest, straight-up narcotics in fancy packaging. You sit up slowly in your candlelit room, moonlight frosting the porcelain wash basin. Gentle knock at the door. Your housemaid enters with a pewter tray. On it, a delicate bottle with an embossed label, Dr. Blythe's Dreamless Drops, for sleep and tranquility of mind. Sounds innocent. Smells like roses, tastes like regret. Because yes, most of these miracle drops were, at their core, potent cocktails of alcohol. Morphine, laudanum, and chloroform, sometimes with a touch of peppermint oil for flair. And they worked. Not gently, but effectively. Your spiraling thoughts, gone. Your racing heart, slowed. Your longings, griefs, overanalyzed conversations, all replaced by a velvet black unconsciousness, courtesy of the nearest chemist. Historians still debate whether doctors truly believed these compounds were safe, or whether it was a mix of ignorance and willful optimism. Either way, Victorian pharmacies were awash with over-the-counter sleep solutions, all promising sweet dreams with names like soothing syrup, night peace, and the frankly suspicious nap nectar. One of the most notorious ingredients, laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol. Laudanum was sold openly in most apothecaries. It was praised for relieving everything from toothaches to melancholia. 1 teaspoon before bed was common. 2, if you'd had a long day. 3, if your husband mentioned the Crimean War again. You shift under the imagined weight of its influence. Laudanum didn't just numbpin it, blurred reality. Dreams became slippery, hallucinations vivid. One diarist described it as being cradled by a dark river that forgot your name. It's poetic and slightly terrifying. Famous creatives swore by it. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was known to rely on laudanum for her chronic health issues, though it almost certainly contributed to her emotional volatility and insomnia. The poet Thomas de Quincey even wrote an entire book about his dependency. Confessions of an English Opium Eater. Spoiler alert. It doesn't end with restful sleep. And yet, laudanum wasn't considered scandalous. Not really. It was sold beside lavender water and tooth powder. Mothers gave it to teething babies. Soldiers carried it in their kit. Middle-class insomniacs kept it in carved cabinets beside their Bibles. It was simply part of the culture. It's a great hush in a bottle. Then came chloral hydrate, a sedative discovered in the 1830s and used increasingly by the 1870s. It knocked you out cleanly, with fewer hallucinations and less chance of becoming a tragic poet. Nicknamed knockout drops, it was used in both clinics and homes. The downside? Frequent use caused dependence, withdrawal, and something ominously called chloral complexion, a dull, grayish hue that made you look like you'd spent a week in a coal bin. Still, doctors prescribed it liberally. Why? Because in an age obsessed with moral restraint and external appearances, sleep meant control, A sleeping patient was a good patient, and a predictable patient even better. The quirkier side of the sleep tonic trend came in the form of patent medicines, often sold via sensational newspaper ads. One such product, Dr. Bevan's Nocturne Wine, claimed to calm the nerves of even the most fretful wife. It contained red wine, quinine, and a dash of belladonnaise, the same plant medieval assassins favored. Fun? Even stranger? The rise of sleep lozenges, compact, dissolvable squares made of sugar, morphine, and various calming herbs like valerian root or passion flower. Marketed as a respectable alternative to drink, they were essentially opium candies. One popular brand was embossed with a smiling moon and the phrase, "Dawn tea think tonight," comforting, if not slightly dystopian. And for those who shied away from hard tonics, there were still herbal solutions. Lavender sachets, chamomile infusions, warm milk spiced with nutmeg. Folk wisdom met pharmacology in a delicate balancing act. Some doctors actually encouraged these milder approaches, especially for women whom they considered more spiritually sensitive to nature's cures. Translation: you're delicate, and I'm tired of writing morphine scripts. But the line between natural and narcotic blurred quickly. Many so-called herbal teas were steeped in mandrake, henbane, or poppy extractal plants with potent sedative effects and mild hallucinogenic tendencies. Imagine sipping your bedtime tea and seeing your wallpaper breathe. Delightful. And still the sleep came. Or at least, the silence. Many patients didn't dream, or didn't remember. Others reported long, labyrinthine nightmares, velvet carriages with no drivers, clocks that ticked backward, voices in rooms that didn't exist. Doctors shrugged. A small price for 8 hours of stillness, they'd say. But deep down, you feel the quiet warning. These cures weren't cures at all. They were pauses, mutings. The symptoms of overthinking, hushed, not healed. You sit up again, brushing off the fog. That bottle on the tray still glows faintly in the dark. Maybe you take the drops. Maybe you don't. But either way, you realize something strange. Even in this world of tonics and syrups, sleep isn't something given. It's something taken. Stolen back from the clutches of noise and thought and guilt. And sometimes, that theft requires a little deception of vile. A story. A lullaby in liquid form. Tonight, maybe just a deep breath will do, maybe not. But at least you're not alone with it. It's not anymore. You sit quietly now, the imagined vial still faintly warm in your palm. The room is hushed. The tonic untouched. Because in this part of the story, something shifts. You feel it in the way your mind starts to tip sideways away from potions and powders and into something older. Slower, less pharmacological. Welcome to the strange and deeply cozy world of Victorian sleep rituals and routines. Because not everyone back then relied on a bottle. Some people tried to outwit their own minds using sheer discipline, superstition, and a generous dose of routine. You imagine yourself at the hearth again, your slippers already warming near the fire. There's a small book in your lap, and a peculiar-looking clock chiming softly. A single candle flickers beside you. No narcotics tonight, just rules. Victorian sleep was never just about sleep. It was a moral issue, a health issue, and an identity issue all at once. Doctors, clergy, and advice manuals all agreed. Good people slept well. And bad sleepers were usually doing something wrong. Maybe you read too late, or thought too deeply, or had impure emotions. Insomnia, probably your own fault. And so an entire cottage industry sprang up around evening routines meant to prevent overthinking. You'd be advised sternly to take a warm foot bath precisely 30 minutes before bed. Not too hot, not too cold, just enough to draw the blood downward and away from your overstimulated brain. One doctor even claimed cold feet were the root of all midnight hysteria. Historians still argue whether he was joking. Then there was the prescribed nightly walk, never more than 300 yards, and always alone. Ideally, you'd walk along a hedge or past quiet shop fronts, avoiding dogs and gossiping neighbors. The goal was to trim the mental wick, as one pamphlet put it, to let your thoughts settle like snow in a shaking globe. You return from your walk, remove your boots, and begin your wind-down regimen. First, brush your hair exactly 100 strokes, not for beauty, but to stimulate the scalp and relax the nerves. Then, change into night clothes, ideally flannel or wool, never silk. Silk, according to several physicians, tickles the moral sense and invites improper thoughts. Next, settle into bed, but don't lie flat right away. Sit up for 5 minutes, hands folded, eyes closed. Think only pleasant thoughts. The official recommendation? Recollections of quiet meadows, cool brooks, and tame birds. One popular booklet, The Sleepful Hour, included illustrations of such scenes: sheep crossing bridges, fishermen with suspiciously emotionless expressions, etc. Kind of like a 19th century screensaver for your mind. But there were also unspoken rituals, passed down in families or whispered in women's magazines. Some folks tucked lavender under their pillows or pinned sprigs of rosemary to their nightshirts. Others recited short prayers not just for safety, but for mental clarity, like, "Keep me from circular thoughts and shadows that linger." Still others used reverse counting, a predecessor to today's sleep meditations. Count from 100 backwards, a guide said, but skip every prime number. It's quirky, sure, but these little habits weren't just about sleep. They were about taking control over chaos. The Victorian world was shifting fast. Steam trains, telegrams, factories that ran through the night. Your daily life might be noisy, exhausting, overwhelming, but bedtime, that was yours. A sacred zone of calm repetition. One fringe practice involved mental cleansing, a kind of cognitive journaling where you write down every thought you had between dinner and bed. Then crumple the paper and throw it into the fireplace. Fire takes the thought, they'd say. And apparently it worked. One diary entry from 1886 reads, "Dreamt nothing, slept like a stone. Burned my whole to-do list." And yet, even in these charming routines, you can feel the underlying anxiety. People weren't just trying to fall asleep, they were trying to stay sane. Overthinking, especially in women, was considered dangerous. Too much thought inflames the womb, one medical pamphlet claimed, completely seriously. Another warned that reading novels before bed could induce false narratives during dreaming, which in turn unsettle the conscience. So many rules, so many ways to get it wrong. You almost admire them for trying to tame their brains with candlelit hairbrushing and hedge walking. At least they weren't wiring themselves to sleep beds anymore. And sometimes the rituals turned theatrical. One aristocratic woman reportedly hired a valet whose entire job was to recite bland weather reports while she fell asleep. He'd drone on for 20 minutes about barometric pressure and fog density. If he accidentally mentioned anything remotely interesting like a thunderstorm, she'd sit bolt upright and demand he start over. Others swore by repetitive movement, sewing the same stitch, rocking slowly in a chair, tapping out lullaby rhythms on the edge of the blanket. The idea was to wear the mind down, like a horse being walked in circles. If you've ever watched a YouTube loop of waves crashing for 4 hours, you get it. You shift again, thinking how familiar this all is. Warm light, repetition, ritual. The not-so-secret trick is this. You're not thinking. You're just thinking predictably, repetitively, slowly, until the anxious part of your brain gives up and lets the sheep take over. Yes, some people still took tonics, or curled up in vibrating beds. But more and more, the sleep movement began shifting toward mental hygiene, sort of proto-CBT. CBT also told you to sleep in wool and avoid thinking about horses. By the end of the 19th century, entire books were dedicated to sleep etiquette. From mattress firmness to window positioning to the exact angle of your pillow. One sleep theorist even suggested facing slightly north to align with Earth's slumbering pulse. Was it nonsense? Possibly. Did it help? Probably. Because here's the secret. Rituals are powerful, even when they're silly. They give shape to the shapeless. They wrap time in a predictable package. And if your thoughts are buzzing like flies, a little ritual can be the swat that settles them down. So tonight, maybe try it. Brush your hair. Count backwards. Walk in your imagination through a hedge-lined path. Invent your own weather valet. Fold your thoughts up like paper and toss them gently into a flickering fireplace. And if all else fails, remember, it's not the sleep that matters, it's the quiet you make on the way there. You lie still now, the imagined fire long faded to a quiet glow behind your eyes. Your thoughts are moving slower, like they're walking in padded slippers. But just as you begin to settle into the rhythm of ritual and calm, the story takes a more curious turn. Because while many Victorians tried to outwit their own brains through silence and routine, others began reaching for something more unusual. Tonight, you're going to visit the stranger methods Victorians used to tame their racing minds, some deeply earnest, others bordering on performance art, and a few that would make even the wildest modern wellness influencer pause mid-juice cleanse. Let's start with the thought jar. It's exactly what it sounds like. Popular among nervous ladies and certain creatively inclined gentlemen, the idea was simple. You'd write down the intrusive thought keeping you up the guilt, the worry, the overheard comment from that awful dinner party, and trap it in a sealed jar. You'd fold the note 3 times, drop it in, and screw the lid tight. Some jars were ornate, etched with glass stars. Others were pickle jars, repurposed with desperate hope. Once sealed, you weren't allowed to reread the contents. Not ever. The act of containment was the point. Historians still argue whether this was born of spiritual ritual or proto-psychological insight. Either way, it was strangely effective. One woman claimed her sleep improved the moment she added a label, 4 thoughts too loud to keep. If that sounds theatrical, wait until you hear about dream diets, a movement of Victorian thinkers who believed that food could directly influence the content of your dreams. According to them, overthinking was a result of vibrational misalignment between stomach and spirit. And yes, that was a real phrase. So what did they recommend? Foods considered cooling to the soul, like soft porridge, stewed apples, boiled lettuce, and plain toast with nothing on it. Rich or spiced foods were strictly banned. One guide advised skipping dinner entirely and consuming only warm barley water before bed. Another warned that onions after dusk could summon emotionally vivid dreaming. If you've ever had a cheese-induced dream about being late to a Victorian funeral, maybe they were onto something. Of course, not everyone bought into the dietary approach. Some leaned instead toward magnetism, which was kind of the 19th century version of energy healing. The basic theory is that your body and, more importantly, your thoughts could be calmed by magnetic currents. You lie there now, trying not to roll your eyes too hard, but you can picture it. A mustached practitioner waving metal rods gently over a client's forehead, murmuring phrases like ease the humors, still the spirit. Some magnets were embedded into special sleep caps, designed to align the head's northern energies. Others came in the form of iron footplates for your bed frame, supposedly grounding your nerves. Did it work? Unclear. But people certainly believed it, especially when paired with soothing whispers and the promise of a night without thinking. Then there were the sleep-inducing mechanical devices, the odd cousins of the earlier vibrating beds. One inventor in 1878 patented a clock of rest, a tabletop contraption that ticked not with gears, but with gentle tapping arms that struck silk bells in an irregular but rhythmic pattern. The idea was to lull the brain into focus fatigue, like counting sheep, but with percussion. The instruction manual advised users to focus on the sound until your mind forgets its own voice. Honestly, sounds kinda nice. Others swore by color therapy, especially blue. Entire bedrooms were repainted in soft cornflower or dusty indigo hues. Curtains, sheets, even nightclothes. Everything turned blue. Why, blue was considered a cooling color for the nervous system. Some physicians even recommended placing a pale blue ribbon across the eyes before bed. Not to block sight, one wrote, but to calm the imagination. So tonight, picture your eyelids gently shaded in ocean light. Try not to think about how strange that sounds. Just go with it. But perhaps the oddest trend: mental chaining. This was the belief that overthinking could be neutralized, not by suppression, but by redirection. You'd take a recurring thought, say anxiety about unpaid bills, and mentally chain it to something absurd. For example, if I don't pay the butcher, he'll tell the mayor who will send a goose to bite my ankles. The theory was that by leaning into the ridiculous, you'd disarm the thought's power. One journal described this as taming the mind by feeding it nonsense, a precursor to modern cognitive reframing, albeit with more poultry. There's something deeply human about it all. The need to anchor yourself to outwit your own noise. The knowledge that sometimes logic isn't enough, that you have to speak your mind's language, even if that language is jars, bells, ribbons, and stewed lettuce. Not all these techniques were charming, of course. Some veered into darker territory, night bindings, for instance. Involved wrapping one's limbs in loose cloth or even leather straps to discourage physical restlessness. One particularly morbid example, a weighted sleep corset, meant to contain wandering desires and encourage modest slumber. Sounds restful, right? And still, amidst the absurd, you sense the desperation. A quiet plea beneath every ribbon and magnet. Let me stop thinking. Just for a little while. You shift gently now, imagining the weight of your own thoughts in a glass jar on the bedside table. The worries are still there, but they're quieter, contained. You've tied a ribbon of blue light around your forehead, boiled your metaphorical lettuce, and added a bell or two just in case. And in all this, you realize something. Strange as they were, these people weren't wrong. The brain wants ritual. It wants stories, symbols, nonsense, rhythm, soft repetition. It doesn't always need sense. It needs surrender. So tonight, lean into it. Chain your thoughts to a goose. The blue wash over you. Picture the dream diet man sipping barley water under a magnetic cap. And drift, because sometimes you don't need to fight your thoughts. You just need to confuse them enough to let go. You're floating now, aren't you? It's not quite asleep, but definitely untethered. Your thoughts keep unfolding like handkerchiefs, slower each time. And yet, somehow, we're still on the floor of that gaslit Victorian bedroom, easing deeper into the minds of people who, just like you once, lay awake in the dark, wishing their brains had an off switch. Only, in this part of the tale, it's not just about the individual mind anymore. Because here's where things get social. Yes. That's right, sleep became a group concern.
Ow.
No longer just a personal struggle, but a public spectacle. And soon enough, a booming business.
Welcome
to the twilight world of Victorian sleep clinics and nervous retreats. You might want to tuck the blankets a little tighter for this one. It starts with a knock at your imaginary front door, a crisp envelope delivered by a gloved hand. Inside is a brochure printed in soft lilac ink, advertising a sanctuary for the sleep-addled and thought-weary. There's a drawing of a modest country house, ivy-wrapped, promising rest without stimulants and recovery through gentle thought discipline. These were real places, and they weren't cheap. You'd travel often by train, then carriage to a countryside retreat where silence reigned. Bells chimed politely, and staff in woolen uniforms whispered instead of spoke. They didn't just treat your insomnia. They treated your identity as a sleeper. Inside these clinics, the rules were strict. Wake times, meal times, rest times, thinking times, all regulated. You had to apply for permission to write a letter. Reading was allowed only after lunch, and only if your mental rhythms permitted. As one former guest put it, I was not permitted to read novels. But I was encouraged to stare at ferns for 45 minutes daily. It helped more than I care to admit. The founding belief that overthinking was contagious, like laughter or yawning. If one patient began ruminating aloud, the staff would gently redirect them with phrases like, "That thought is best left for morning." Imagine trying that on your group chat. Of course, these clinics weren't all benevolence and boiled cabbage. Some were oddly theatrical. One required guests to perform silent tableau in the evenings, standing still in meaningful poses to promote emotional clarity. Another hosted thought-fasting dinners, where you ate in silence and wrote down any intrusive idea that crept in between bites. These were collected at the end and ceremoniously burned. Again, the Victorians and their pyromaniac paper rituals. A particularly famous retreat in Yorkshire offered nocturnal vapor therapy, a term which sounds mysterious, but really just meant sitting in a steam room scented with lavender and faintly smoked peat. One physician called it a night swamp for the mind, which feels either magical or gross, depending on how sleepy you are. Historians still argue whether these clinics were truly therapeutic or just a place to hide the socially overwhelmed. Either way, they spread fast. By 1890, England alone had more than 50 such sleep asylums, and several had multi-year wait lists. You might be wondering who went. The short answer? Anyone with money and racing thoughts. It's mostly middle-class women and aging scholars. People too tired to function, but too respectable to admit to madness. Doctors framed their ailments as cerebral fatigue, moral insomnia, or the ever-popular excess of modern input. One newspaper headline actually read, "Too much telegraph. society ladies, overexcited by the wireless word. Not all these retreats were strictly medical. Some leaned spiritual. There were Quaker sleep houses where guests were encouraged to confess their most persistent thoughts to God, then sleep on the floor in simple linen robes. Others were run by amateur hypnotists who believed your dreams could be pre-coded by murmuring suggestive imagery as you drifted off. Think of the moon, one practitioner advised, and she will carry you. You wonder, lying there in your own bed now, what it must have felt like to travel days by train just to sleep in a strange bed with a fern and a paper fan for company. You imagine the awkward silence of 10 strangers pretending they not all panicking about unfinished novels or scandalous dinner conversations. The soft chime of a bell announcing dream time. Yet many people swore these places changed their lives. A famous composer credited a 2-week stay at a Devon retreat for ending a 2-year bout of night terrors. A London professor insisted he was cured of overthinking by 9 evenings of structured stillness and mild soups. A little poetic, perhaps, but you can't help but admire the drama. These clinics also inspired a booming home sleep movement. Suddenly, magazines were filled with articles on how to create your own rest regimen. Readers were encouraged to keep mental stillness journals or organize group nap times. One London socialite hosted pre-bed salons, where guests sat silently in velvet chairs sipping hot milk and watching an oil lamp sway. Some people even built sleep rooms, dedicated chambers where nothing stimulating was allowed. No books, no conversation, not even clocks. Just blue walls, soft furniture, and the occasional bowl of steamed moss for ambience. It was basically the prototype of today's meditation pod, only damper. Still, despite all the effort, no one method worked for everyone. And Victorian doctors knew it. Some clinics employed sleep detectives, gentle observers who would quietly sit with a patient for nights at a time, tracking their patterns. If you got up to pace, they noted it. If you whispered to yourself, they leaned in. Their notebooks were filled with phrases like, restless from 2:40 to 3:15. Nice. Resumed stillness at 3:27. Honestly, that's more attention than most people get from their therapist today. You shift now, just slightly, feeling a little seen, not in a creepy sleep detective way, but in the way these people seem to understand. Overthinking doesn't need solving, it needs witnessing. It's not always about answers. Sometimes it's about having someone quietly keep watch while your mind plays its late-night tricks. So whether you in a countryside sleep asylum or just lying here in the hum of your own room, there's comfort in knowing people have always tried, always fussed and whispered and journaled their way toward rest. And tonight, maybe all you need is the idea that someone somewhere is keeping the night still with you. Your breath is quiet now, like it's forgotten it ever knew how to rush. The air in your chest moves as slowly as velvet being pulled through water. And that's good, because tonight, as you drift deeper into the softening hush of Victorian sleep lore, the story takes on a more intimate shape, the kind that makes you feel like you're eavesdropping on someone else's 3 a.m. thoughts? Because we're not in the clinics anymore. Not in the retreats or the vapor baths or the ribbon-draped sleep salons. We're home again. Specifically, we're in the Victorian bedroom. It's the real one. Sanitized magazine version, but the one with creaky floors, a water jug by the fire, and a dozen quiet rituals designed to trick the mind into surrender. To see, the Victorians didn't just try to sleep. They prepared for it with the dedication of someone getting ready for a duel, or possibly both. There was a protocol step so precise you'd think they were training for a sleep Olympics. And maybe in a way, they were. Let's start with the bed-turning ritual.
Guys.
Before climbing in, let's be honest, your housemate, if you were wealthy, would turn the bed. This meant folding back the sheets, smoothing them 3 times, fluffing the feather mattress with a hand-cranked paddle, and checking for unwanted drafts. Some people swore by sleeping with the bed angled precisely north-south, convinced this aligned the body's earth current. Others placed coins under their pillows to weigh down the dreams. Honestly, you wouldn't be blamed for doing both, just in case. Then came the night garments. Victorian sleepwear wasn't cute, was long-buttoned, and usually starched to within an inch of its life, but it had purpose. Some believed a stiff collar discouraged late-night wandering thoughts. A few fringe thinkers even stitched Bible verses into the hems as a kind of spiritual sleep shield. Historians still argue whether this was more piety or paranoia. Once dressed, you'd perform your ablutions. Cold water was preferred because too much warmth excites the brain. This included a brisk facial splash, a palmful of rose water on the neck, and, in some eccentric households, a quick dab of vinegar behind the ears. Why vinegar? Who knows? But one doctor insisted it quenched the inner chatter. You're allowed to be skeptical. Then it was time for sound control. The Victorian home wasn't silent. Horses clopped outside, pipes groaned, people shouted at lamplighters. So the sleep-obsessed got creative. Heavy velvet drapes, wool stuffed door seals, even padded headboards. Not for comfort, but to muffle ambient noise. Some sleep manuals recommended hiring someone to play soft harp music downstairs at bedtime. Others preferred natural white noise, like the sound of a clock's tick or the bubbling of a nearby kettle. The goal wasn't silence. It was predictable sound repetition to lull the overactive mind. And now we reach what might be the most curious part, the mental debriefing ritual. Picture it too, sitting on the edge of your bed in your ankle-length cotton gown, whispering softly to no one in particular. This was known as releasing the day. You'd go over events in reverse, starting with dinner, then tea, then afternoon errands, all the way back to morning. The idea was to tie off loose mental threads, as one guide put it, so that no memory might unravel in the night. Almost like mental flossing. Sometimes this was done aloud, sometimes in a diary. A popular template went: what did I do well? What did I forget? What no longer matters? What can wait until morning? Modern therapy, eat your heart out. But not everyone was that organized. Some people swore by bedroom talismans objects to focus their minds at bedtime. A small pouch of lavender, a wooden spoon, photo of someone long dead. One woman claimed to sleep better only when her boots were turned upside down by the hearth. No explanation given, just boots. The mind clings to what it clings to. Others kept sleep books not to be read but to be held. These weren't novels, but small volumes of poetry, devotional verses, or calming philosophical fragments. They weren't supposed to be exciting. If you found them too interesting, you were meant to get a different one. The goal wasn't stimulation, it was mental sedation. Some had only 1 or 2 lines per page, spaced wide apart, encouraging the reader to pause, and pause again, and maybe not even reach the end. And yes, of course, there were prayers, not just religious but oddly personal ones. Let my limbs lie still. One popular bedtime verse began. Let my mind forget its own name. Some families recited them together. Others whispered them into hot cups of milk, letting the steam carry the words upward like little sleep balloons. You're probably wondering, did all this really help? And the answer is, sometimes weirdly, yes, because none of it was magic. It was structure. The anxious brain loves structure. These weren't just quirky habits. They were cognitive Custini rituals telling your brain, you're safe now. It's okay to stop. You shift again in your bed, noticing the things you do without even thinking. The angle of your pillow. The way your left foot always slips free of the blanket. Maybe it's not so different. You're running your own bedtime protocol, just with fewer vinegar dabs and more phone scrolling. Though honestly, the Victorians would be horrified by the glowing rectangle inches from your face. They'd call it light-born madness, probably. But still, it's the same need.
Ow.
The same quiet longing to wind down, not just physically, but mentally. To be allowed to let go, to stop carrying every unfinished sentence and unspoken worry like a backpack into your dreams. So tonight, consider your own version of releasing the day. You don't have to list every event. Just acknowledge that it happened, that you did it, that you got through. And maybe, just maybe, it doesn't need to be carried any further. You're wearing imaginary Victorian sleepwear now. Blue, of course. There's a spoon on your nightstand and a picture of a stranger who seems kind. Outside, the streets are quiet. Inside, your thoughts are winding down like the slow turn of a key in a very old lock. And somewhere, just barely audible, a harp plays in another room. Your breath feels heavier now, like velvet curtains settling into place. The room around you is hushed, dim, almost wholly except for maybe the faint hum of the fridge or the occasional creak from the pipes. But we can pretend that it's just the sound of a distant oil lamp flickering in a house that smells faintly of camphor and lavender. Because we're still there, still in the layered, odd, and occasionally ridiculous world of Victorian sleep culture. And tonight, things get weird. Like goose feathers and electromagnetic blankets weird. 'Cause even after all the prayer poems and fern staring, some Victorians still couldn't sleep. The nightly routines, the nervous retreats, the hushed harp melodies, they weren't enough. And that's when desperation met invention. Welcome to the dreamy but slightly unhinged corner of Victorian sleep gadgets and pseudoscience. You begin, of course, with the somniograph. Doesn't that sound important? Like a machine that prints dreams onto paper? Not quite. It was a contraption meant to monitor your nighttime movements by attaching small bells to the corners of your bed. If you stirred, they rang. If they didn't ring, the doctor declared you subconsciously restful. That's right, some people paid for the privilege of having their tossing and turning audibly documented. Early quantified self, Victorian edition. Then there was the sleep magnetizer, a favorite among amateur inventors. This delightful instrument was a pillow lined with thin iron rods believed to align cranial currents while you slept. Did it work? Probably not. But it looked extremely medical, which is half the battle when you're treating imaginary brain static. One enterprising doctor even attached a small compass to the top and claimed you could steer your thoughts northward. Historians still argue whether he believed a tour just knew how to market to anxious aristocrats. Perhaps you preferred something more fashionable. How about the soporific bonnet? Yes, it's real. Imagine a sleep cap made of quilted silk, stuffed with herbs like hops, chamomile, and sometimes even powdered lead. You tied it under your chin and let the fumes lull you into a state of drowsy surrender. One 1885 guide praised it for gently confusing the mind into peaceful ignorance. Not a terrible life goal, honestly. But no list of sleep gadgetry would be complete without the grandly named oscillating pulvinar apparatus. What was it? A rocking bed. Literally. A specially designed frame that caused the mattress to gently sway side to side, as if you were a very large, very troubled baby. A few versions ran on clockwork gears. One was powered by a house cat walking in circles on a tiny treadmill. No, I am not making that up. Some devices were more subtle. There was the sleep tuner, a small glass orb that emitted a low musical hum when warmed by a candle. You placed it beside your pillow, where it would vibrate softly through the night. Supposedly, the tone was tuned to the body's natural rhythm, just slightly annoying. Other inventions leaned into straight-up mysticism. One popular item was the etherdome, a lace-draped metal hoop suspended over the bed, supposedly infused with spiritual energy. You weren't supposed to touch it. Just lie beneath it, breathe evenly, and let the subtle forces of the upper air do their work. Some people claimed it gave them prophetic dreams. Others used it as a clothes rack. As with most wellness fads, it really depended on the user. And of course, the Victorians didn't stop at gadgets. They wanted sleep potions too, dozens of them. Most were herbal, like Godfrey's cordial, syrupy mix of poppy extract and treacle that knocked you out faster than your aunt's third retelling of that vacation story. Some potions were gentle, others less so. Chloral hydrate, for example, became a fashionable sedative for the upper class. People called it sleeping drops. And yes, it worked. It also caused memory loss and made your dreams smell like cinnamon and old coins, allegedly, but not all remedies were chemical. Some were vibrational. There was a short-lived trend in the 1890s where doctors recommended sleeping on beds made entirely of goose feathers, citing that birds are natural dreamers. A bit of a stretch, maybe. Still, wealthy clients paid handsomely for imported Hungarian goose-down mattresses. Some even had feathers refluffed seasonally to restore their dream-inducing bounce. If your allergies are tingling just hearing that. Same. And don't forget light therapy. That's right. Not just darkness, carefully choreographed light. Some bedrooms were fitted with stained glass lanterns that bathed the sleeper in soft blue or violet hues. Blue was for calming thoughts. Violet was supposed to purge restless imaginings. Red was strictly forbidden, too stimulating. You'd basically lie in a low-lit spa and let the color vibrations untangle your soul. This was like Instagram mood lighting 150 years early. You pause right now in your modern room. No oscillating bed, no feather avalanche. Maybe just a nightlight and the low glow of a screen across the room. And still, the same need hums underneath it. All the hope that some gadget, some potion, some little trick will be the one that finally shuts the mind up. Because that's what it always was. Not about sleep, exactly, but control. The belief that if you just had the right thing, the right pillow, bonnet, compass cap, or herbal syrup, you could finally win. You could finally conquer your brain's midnight rebellion. And yet, here's the odd thing. Some of these odd contraptions did help. Not because of magnets or feathers or ether, but because they convinced people it was okay to let go. Ain't the placebo effect in bloom? A whisper to the mind that said, someone thought of this. Someone built it. You're not alone in your overthinking. You shift under your blanket, almost involuntarily, imagining yourself lying beneath a humming glass orb or adjusting your herb-stuffed sleep bonnet. It's ridiculous and oddly soothing. Maybe you don't need the gadgets. Maybe you just need the permission. The Victorians were nothing if not committed to the sleep aesthetic, whether it was the actual silence or just the pageantry of trying. They understood something we often forget, that rest isn't just a biological state. It's an art, an intention, curated little stage where the brain can rehearse its exit, one scene at a time. So tonight, if the usual tricks don't work, if your thoughts pace back and forth like tiny Victorian children denied dessert, maybe invent something. Create your own oscillating pulvinar apparatus, a whisper song, a fake potion, a bedtime routine, so specific and silly it can only belong to you. After all, if someone once put a cat on a treadmill to help someone else fall asleep, your method can't possibly be more absurd. The room feels quieter now. Your limbs are heavy. The air itself seems to hush, as if it's listening in, waiting. Beneath that softness, deeper still, lingers the strangely comforting thought. You're not the first to struggle with sleep, not by centuries. Tonight, we drift away from beds and gadgets and into something murkier, something that tickled at the edges of Victorian understanding, the unconscious mind. Because for every doctor prescribing vapor baths or feather pillows, there was someone else, usually with a thick beard and a library filled with weird books, asking the darker question, what's happening inside the mind when the lights go out? And what if those thoughts, those whispers and racing spirals and imaginary arguments, weren't just symptoms? What if they were clues? Enter the philosophical physicians. Part doctor, part dream detective. These were the thinkers who peered into the mystery of overthinking and saw something more than just a nuisance. They saw a window. One of the earliest voices in this movement was Dr. James Braid, a Scottish surgeon turned mesmerism enthusiast. He wasn't exactly a sleep doctor, but his work with hypnosis, what he called neurohypnology, shook the Victorian world awake and ironically helped people fall asleep. His theory? That mental fatigue wasn't about being too active, but about being stuck, like a carriage wheel turning in mud. His cure? Focus the eyes on a fixed point, speak in soft, slow repetitions, and guide the patient into a trance. A trance that might, eventually, become sleep. This technique caught on. It spread through parlors and clinics. People practiced on each other. Mesmerism salons popped up, promising deep relaxation and liberation from persistent thoughts. A little shady, sure, but many swore it worked. The idea of talking someone to sleep wasn't just theatrical, it was revolutionary. Historians still argue whether early mesmerists were doctors or charlatans, or some hazy mix of both. But they did one thing right. They treated the mind as something worthy of listening to, not just silencing. And from there, things got dreamy. Literally. As the century turned, interest in dream interpretation skyrocketed. Dream journals, once a private curiosity, became bestsellers. People were convinced their nightmares were coded messages from the subconscious. Even Queen Victoria reportedly kept a dream advisor, though that might just be gossip. Dream interpretation blended science and mysticism with Victorian flair. Books like The Key to Dreamland or Night Visions, interpreting the inner mirror, offered sprawling dictionaries. A staircase meant ambition. A locked door meant repressed feelings. A burning tree, emotional revelation, and possible foot ailments. Some theories were rooted in Freudian psychology, just beginning to trickle in from Vienna, though Freud's interpretation of dreams wouldn't fully shake Victorian medicine until the 20th century. Whispers of his ideas, repression, hidden desire, unresolved memory were already unsettling drawing rooms. Victorians started to suspect that sleeplessness wasn't just a nervous habit. It was the mind resisting silence, trying to say something, to finish a sentence you didn't know you'd started, to nudge you toward unfinished business, emotionally, creatively, even spiritually. Which brings us to one of the more fascinating fringe practices: sleep writing. Yes, it's as weird as it sounds. The idea was to let the hand do the talking while the brain was in that half-dreaming pre-sleep state. Some called it automatic writing, others nocturnal transcription. It involved sitting quietly, eyes half closed, and letting the pen drift across the page. No planning, no grammar, just flow. Some of what got written was gibberish. Some was eerie. Some was unexpectedly profound. One widely circulated example involved a woman who wrote, "I am walking through doors I do not remember building. But they open, and that must mean something." Another claimed to have channeled the memory of sleep itself, which sounds poetic until you realize she filled 12 pages describing the smell of wool and cinnamon. This wasn't just creative nonsense. Some doctors believed automatic writing could offload mental tension, draining excess thought energy so the body could rest. It was like giving the mind a dimly lit hallway to wander down so the rest of you could slip quietly into dreams. A few sleep clinics even installed writing desks beside patient beds. Patients were told, if the thoughts come, give them somewhere to go. Imagine that. Scribbling at midnight by candlelight, your hand chasing dreams while your brain unknots itself. Of course, not everyone was impressed. More skeptical doctors scoffed, calling it midnight delirium or emotional self-indulgence. But even they couldn't fully dismiss the results. Some patients did sleep better afterward. And then came the deep dream, salons part, support group, part dream analysis. People gathered in drawing rooms to share and decode each other's dreams. Think of it as Victorian group therapy, minus the comfy chairs, and plus a lot more velvet. These salons weren't just for dreams. They were a space to talk about sleeplessness, guilt, anxiety, all the things people didn't say out loud in polite society. To some extent, they reframed overthinking as an unprocessed life, a sign you were paying attention. You lie there now, maybe with your own thoughts swimming, some coherent, some flickering, maybe something half-remembered from your own dreams, the kind of image that floats just outside the edge of language. Maybe that's the point. The Victorians didn't always get it right. Sometimes they electrocuted themselves in the name of sleep. But their better instincts, the ones that whispered your thoughts matter. Even the messy ones, those were closer to wisdom than we usually admit, because sleep, they began to realize, isn't always about quieting the mind. Sometimes it's about listening to it long enough that it feels safe to rest. So tonight, if your mind is restless, don't fight it. Don't shame it. Just notice it. Maybe even talk to it. Write to it. Let it write back. Not to fix it. You hear it, and then perhaps it will hush itself. Your breathing is slower now. The tension in your forehead softens. You sink a little deeper, like a stone disappearing into a still lake. It's not silence yet, but it's getting close. That lovely stretched out quiet before the body gives in completely. And as your eyes grow heavier, we stay nestled within that flickering Victorian candlelight world, still asking, what do we do with too many thoughts at midnight? Because while doctors prescribed gadgets and elixirs and mystical dream bonnets, another solution was gaining quiet traction across parlors, libraries, and cramped bedchambers. The bedtime ritual of reading aloud, not just for children. Especially reading out loud to oneself, was quietly celebrated in Victorian sleep culture. A tool not just for education, but for escape, for soft distraction, for rhythm. The favored texts, something called evening editions, small, inexpensive booklets designed specifically for drowsy minds. It's nothing too thrilling. No murder mysteries, just gentle travel journals, sermons without fire and brimstone, or heavily abridged Greek myths where nobody gets their liver pecked out by eagles. One popular series was Pastoral Nights. It's a dozen volumes of rural English poetry printed in pale blue ink, soothing to the eye, allegedly. Another crowd favorite was the Quieting Compendium, a kind of proto-sleep podcast in pamphlet form. It contained bedtime affirmations, one-paragraph biographies of obscure saints, and instructions on how to breathe like a duck falling asleep. You chuckle? Maybe. Because yes, some of it was silly. But the intention behind it, that the brain needed a soft hand to hold as it wound down, was remarkably ahead of its time. Some insomniacs took to reading aloud entire catalogues of garden seeds or parliamentary rosters. One well-known barrister swore by the complete index of railway junctions in Derbyshire. Dry enough to make your thoughts curl up and nap from sheer boredom. It's like the Victorian equivalent of watching paint dry, except, with more wigs. But not everyone read alone. In many households, bedtime reading was communal. Families gathered for one final chapter, often from the Bible, but sometimes from serialized novels or moral tales. The rhythm of a familiar voice was itself a sedative. Children learned to associate tone and cadence with safety and closure. And in boarding houses, where privacy was rare and sleep often elusive, roommates sometimes took turns reading to each other, just to settle the air. The content didn't matter. It was the voice, the human presence. This is when the idea of story as sleep medicine began to evolve from folk custom into something more structured. Some physicians even prescribed reading aloud as a formal part of insomnia treatment. The key, they said, was repetition and pacing. Choose something you already know, something comforting, something that moves gently forward, but never surprises you. It's kind of like, this very script. Historians still argue whether bedtime reading was truly therapeutic or just a cultural habit dressed in medical language. But in diaries and letters from the time, one thing is clear. People treasured their reading hours as a mental untying, a safe corridor between chaos and rest, and it wasn't always novels. Some Victorians swore by recitation, memorizing poetry or hymns, and whispering them back to themselves in bed. They called it mental wool gathering. The idea was to build little thought loops, so gentle, so rhythmic, that your mind would be lulled into forgetfulness. You weren't trying to solve anything. You were trying to drift. Popular choices included Longfellow, Christina Rossetti, and anonymous odes to rain clouds. One especially popular nighttime verse was, "Lay down thy thought, as lambs upon the fold, and sleep shall come." Not loud, but bold. Simple, a bit heavy-handed. But sometimes that's what a racing brain needs, a little permission wrapped in iambic tetrameter. Some households even had dedicated sleep chairs. Cozy nooks by the bed where one person would read until the other began to snore. If you've ever been lulled to sleep by a podcast host describing Victorian butter churning, you're basically participating in the modern descendant of this practice. And let's not forget the Victorians who pushed the idea even further into the realm of scripted sleep stories. Gentle narratives crafted specifically to soothe. No tension, no conflict. Just enough plot to keep your mind walking forward, never sprinting. These weren't bestsellers, weren't even widely published. Most were passed around in salons or scribbled privately into diaries. One example? Sparrow in the Hedge, a 10-page tale of a small bird befriending a shrub. Nothing happened. They just existed near each other. It was oddly perfect. Other stories featured a man organizing his spice cabinet in silence. A girl who counted pebbles by moonlight. A river that didn't go anywhere, but made very pleasant sounds. The point wasn't to entertain. It was to replace the thoughts you didn't ask for with ones you could control. Slow ones. Ones with edges smoothed like beach stones. You might wonder, why did they do all this? Why this obsession with reading and repetition? Because by the late 1800s, the Victorians had made a quiet discovery, maybe without realizing it. Mental noise can't be silenced, only drowned out by something softer. And you're feeling that now, aren't you? Your own thoughts replaced by a gentle narrative about people trying to lull their brains with poetry and shrub friendships. It's kind of lovely. A soft relay across centuries from one overthinking human to another. Tonight, if your mind begins to twist and spark, you start replaying that awkward comment from lunch 3 years ago, consider this. There are words for that. Not diagnoses. It's not disorders. Just rituals. Quieting tools.
The comfort of a voice your own.
Someone else walking you through the fog until the path disappears and all that is left is rest. Maybe keep a book nearby, something you've read before. Maybe even this. And remember, it doesn't have to be exciting. In fact, it really shouldn't be. Because sleep, much like a Victorian novel, isn't about the climax. It's about the long, slow unraveling of thought into stillness. Let the words do the work. You don't have to. Now you lie still, softer than before. Your eyelids feel like they've grown a little heavier, like someone's gently pressing a warm palm over them. You're almost there. And as the hush builds around you, we keep following the last faint glimmers of Victorian sleep wisdom, this time into the domain of the unspeakable. The things people didn't say, the things they didn't dare say, especially when it came to the link between sleep and shame. Because while Victorians had no shortage of sleep cures involving tepid foot baths or pressed lavender pouches, there was another force humming beneath it all. A quiet guilt, deep unease around why they couldn't sleep. Often it came down to moral failure, or at least what they believed was moral failure. See, in Victorian England, insomnia wasn't just a medical issue. It was often framed as a character flaw, spiritual weakness. If you lay awake at night, unable to settle your thoughts, the implication was that something inside you was unbalanced, not just your nerves, but your soul. Doctors, pastors, and social critics agreed. The truly virtuous slept well. You, however, are lying there wondering if you forgot to pay that bill, or whether someone misread your tone in that text. And if you were Victorian, you might start thinking, is this a punishment? Am I too selfish? Too impure? Too full of worldly ambition? Not a great mindset for sleep. Victorian literature is peppered with insomniacs, who are portrayed as brooding, corrupt, or emotionally repressed. Think tortured artists, failed aristocrats, or overly dramatic governesses staring out the window at 3 a.m. The message was subtle, but clear. If you can't sleep, it's probably your fault. And so came the rise of moral sleep guidance. This wasn't medical, it was devotional. Little books like Night Whispers to the Weary Heart or Sleep is Divine Obedience urged readers to confess all mental vanity, abandon needless striving, and submit the intellect to divine silence. The implication? Overthinking at bedtime was an act of pride. One wildly popular pamphlet, The Restless Are the Rebellious, encouraged nighttime self-flagellation, not literally, but through intense prayer cycles meant to humble the mind until dreams are permitted. Sleep wasn't just a gift. It was something you had to deserve. Historians still argue whether these texts reflect genuine spiritual belief or a more repressive cultural impulse, an attempt to control thought through shame, probably both. But one thing's for sure, they made bedtime a lot more complicated than it needed to be. There were fringe exceptions, of course. A few brave thinkers challenged this model. One was Mrs. Margaret Lytton Chase, a writer and self-styled domestic philosopher who published an underground booklet titled The Mind May Wander at Night. It argued that overthinking was a natural part of being human, especially for women, and that sleep would return when thoughts had found their own quiet edges. She was mocked in public, of course, but privately, her words traveled. People began keeping thought diaries, little bedside journals, where they'd write down their midnight spirals not to erase them, but to witness them. One entry, found in a tin box under a boarding house floorboard, reads, "I cannot stop listing all the ways I failed today. So I write them down and promise to read them again at breakfast. If they still matter, then I'll deal with them. If not, they can stay here." That's kind of beautiful. Practical too. Some families even adopted what they called evening reckonings, a brief ritual before bed where each member admitted one thing that had been bothering them. It's not to seek advice, just to say it aloud, to release it into the air so it didn't turn into a thought monster once the candles went out. The shift was slow, but noticeable, from shaming the restless mind to accepting it gently. By the end of the Victorian era, new kind of bedtime writing emerged, forgiveness letters to the self. These were short, calming notes addressed inward like this one. "Dear me, you didn't get everything right today, but you tried, and that was enough for now. You may rest." They weren't public, so often they were burned the next morning. But the act of writing them, kind of quiet absolution. You're lying there now, aren't you? Maybe there's something tugging at your thoughts, a mistake you keep replaying, a plan you think you should have made, an awkward moment that resurfaces just when your eyes begin to close. Take a breath. Victorians knew that feeling too. Maybe not in your words, but in your weight. They built entire bedtime rituals around softening it, around admitting the restless mind instead of fighting it, around whispering back to it, "You're allowed to be noisy, but you're also allowed to hush." And here's where it gets interesting. Victorian doctors eventually observed that insomniacs who wrote these letters or performed quiet forgiveness rituals tended to fall asleep faster. They didn't call it mindfulness. They didn't have brain scans. They just saw it happen over and over again. One eccentric physician, Dr. Alton Haversham, even published a short-lived guide titled "To Forgive is to Drowse." It included handwritten sample apologies to one's own liver. But underneath the humor was a very real theory, that self-judgment keeps the body alert, while kindness lets it release. Tonight, you might want to try that. If your thoughts won't settle, write to them. Forgive them. Or say nothing at all, and just allow them. No shame, no moralizing. Just the truth. Your mind is a busy place, and that's okay. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're just thinking a little too much in a body that's tired. So let the thoughts pass like shadows over water. Let them come. Let them go. You don't need to chase them. You don't need to fix them. You just need to breathe. The rest will follow. And now we arrive, softly, gently, at the last flicker of candlelight. That final stretch of the night, when even the most stubborn thoughts grow slow and fuzzy, like feathers drifting in a still room. You've traveled far tonight through tonics and thundercoats, fussy doctors and strange bedtime poetry, and now you're ready for the final Victorian sleep experiment of them all, the art of surrender. Because toward the end of the 19th century, a curious shift occurred. After decades of trying to control, sleep regulate it, schedule it, coax it with gadgets and lectures up, a few odd but lovely thinkers began asking, what if we stopped trying so hard? You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment where the harder you push to fall asleep, the more awake you become. It's like quicksand. And some Victorians noticed the same trap. Enter the world of passive sleep therapies. No rituals, no lists, no herbal foot slathers, just stillness, observing, letting the brain wind down on its own like a music box losing speed. This was especially popular among nervous gentlemen and hysterical ladies, Victorian code, for anyone with a racing mind. A quiet movement began to form around something they called deliberate drowsing. The instructions were beautifully simple. Lie still. Feel the shape of your body. Don't fight your thoughts. Don't follow them. Just watch them pass, like shadows on the ceiling. Let your mind wander, not on purpose, but like a feather drifting on air currents. One practitioner described it as becoming a piece of furniture that dreams. Not asleep, not awake, just being. You can try it now if you like. A soft inhale, a softer exhale. Feel where your heels touch the mattress, the backs of your knees, the weight of your hands. There's no need to change anything. Just notice. Be as lazy as humanly possible. The Victorians even had an outfit for this. Of course they did. They called it the repose wrapper, long unstructured cotton robe with no buttons or ties. Designed to remind the wearer that they didn't need to do anything. It was like putting on a permission slip to stop, to yield, to let go. Doctors like Dr. Adelaide Morecambe and Reverend St. Peter Wallstone began writing little pamphlets about this strange, beautiful state of half-sleep. They called it sacred idleness, encouraged patients to go to bed not to sleep, but simply to lie there and exist without obligation. If sleep came, fine. If not, also fine. The goal was to untangle sleep from effort, to take away the performance anxiety, though they didn't call it that, too modern, too psychological. They called it fear of unsanctioned waking. Sounds way fancier. And guess what? It worked. Historians still argue whether sacred idleness was a precursor to mindfulness meditation, or just a polite way of saying, give up, dear. Either way, people who embraced it reported falling asleep more easily, sleeping more deeply, and here's the kicker, waking up without that nagging guilt of having failed the night. Because that was the trick all along. Sleep isn't something you conquer. It's something you sink into, like fog, like warm water, like a story with no ending. You're floating there now. The world around you, quieter than it's been all day, your limbs growing heavier with every breath. Thoughts are still there, sure, but smaller now, softer, like background actors fading from the stage. You don't need to analyze any of it. You don't need to do sleep. You just let it arrive. You've earned that. And if your mind still flickers, you've got tools now. Maybe you'll try a nonsense bedtime poem. You'll write yourself a forgiveness letter. Maybe you'll picture a Victorian duck breathing itself to sleep. Whatever you choose, just know, You re part of a very long lineage of humans trying to quiet their brains when the world goes dim. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're just tired. And bedtime, here, is finally safe. So settle in. Let the mattress hold you. Let the thoughts uncoil. And know that in this soft hour, there's nothing left to fix. No ambition, no guilt, no schedule, just hush. You are allowed to rest. And now even the words begin to fade. The air around you has thickened into something softer than silence. Breath is longer than the last. Each thought a little more distant. You've traveled through dusty rooms and candlelit clinics, through the minds of worry-worn poets and earnest doctors fumbling with sleep tonics and moral certainties, and in doing so, you've proven what those Victorians always suspected, that the mind needs a story, not to solve, it's just to wander in. Let the imagery blur now. The velvet curtains, the creaking floorboards, the long-forgotten sleep chairs and dream journals. They're all fading into the hush. There is no urgency now, no next step. You are not a problem to fix. You are not behind. You're not late to anything. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Drifting between awareness and rest, wrapped in the gentlest version of yourself. Let the body grow heavy, as if the air itself is tucking you in. Let your thoughts scatter like ash. Let the story end not with a bang or a tidy lesson, but with the simplest truth of all. You made it to this moment, and that is enough. Sleep will come. Maybe now, maybe soon. Yeah. But when it does, it won't need your help. Just your permission. So breathe and drift and sleep.